The lines dangle silently into the hole in the ice, unmoving in the dark water below, and with no tugs or tremors to call their attention, the family allows their gazes to drift away from the narrow task of fishing and outward toward the wider world of white, the endless, snow-covered horizon stretching around them like the inside of a bowl carved from ice, its rim lined with drifting snowbanks, and the faint silhouettes of low, distant ridges softened by time and distance. With the stillness of their lines holding steady, the work becomes not active, but contemplative, a different kind of labor, of watching, of noticing, of being present in a landscape where even the subtlest movement carries meaning. The father's eyes trace a long line across the snow, following the marks left by a small animal, likely an Arctic hare or fox, that passed during the night or early morning, its prints half covered by new snow, but still readable to someone who knows what to look for. He doesn't point them out, doesn't speak, only watches them quietly, noting the direction they came from and the angle at which they shifted course. The older boy sees the same trail and nods to himself, mimicking his father's gaze, trying to learn what it is to read the land, not with curiosity, but with fluency. The mother glances up at the clouds and narrows her eyes ever so slightly, not from strain, but from habit, her mind gauging the speed of their movement, the way the light behind them dims and pulses, calculating without numbers the possibility of stronger winds or a change in the snow's texture. The grandmother, seated with her hands folded in her lap, hums quietly, barely above the whisper of the wind, her voice rising and falling like the low, repetitive rhythm of waves lapping under a dock. Though there is no sea in sight and the only water is buried deep below the frozen crust of the world around them, the younger boy leans back into a shallow snowbank he made for himself earlier, staring upward at the uniform sky, watching the occasional drift of a snowflake pass directly in front of his face, blinking slowly, as if tracking time by the flakes alone. One lands on his nose, and he does not flinch, only lets it melt and disappear. The wind shifts direction just slightly, bringing with it a change in the pitch of sound across the snowfield, a longer, smoother note that carries no urgency, only a subtle difference that those who live close to the land can feel in their shoulders and in the lining of their coats. The dogs raise their heads almost in unison, sniffing the air, not alarmed, but attentive, their ears perking toward the distant ridge where nothing can be seen but the idea of motion hangs loosely in the light. It might be a gust of wind between ice ridges. It might be a bird flying low to the ground, or it might be nothing at all. But still the family pauses and lets their attention widen to include whatever that unseen shift might be. And then, as quickly as the moment stretched out, it passes. The wind returns to its previous direction. The sound settles. The dogs lay their heads back on their paws, and the world once again exhales into stillness. No fish have bitten. The water remains undisturbed. The sky remains unchanged, and still, the family watches, not because they expect something to happen, but because the act of watching is part of the life they lead here. The father stands slowly, brushes snow from his knees, and walks a few steps to the side to inspect the snowpack near a shallow drift, pressing it with his boot to feel its firmness, gauging how it might shift if the wind where to pick up. He crouches and gathers a handful, packs it loosely between his palms, examines its texture, not too dry, not too wet, then scatters it back into the wind without a word. The children resume their stillness, and the mother begins slowly rapping one of the unused lines, not because it is time to leave, but because she senses it may be time to pause again soon. The grandmother rests her chin on her palm and looks toward the sled, not out of concern, but as a way of grounding herself again, recentering within the slow landscape. They have not moved much, and nothing significant has changed. But in their stillness, they have continued the day, the way snow continues to fall, unseen in its progress, quiet in its presence, but always there. The lines remain in the water, the snow continues to gather, and the family stays seated, patient and calm, not waiting for anything in particular, but simply sharing another motionless hour in the great silence of the north. After long hours of sitting quietly beside the hole in the ice, feeling the rhythm of the cold deepen into the bones, and the weight of the day grow heavier on the shoulders in that soft, pressing way that does not tire so much as slow the blood and quiet the mind, the family gradually begins to shift into the next part of the afternoon. Not packing up, not yet, but preparing for the later return by checking what must be repaired, what must be tightened, and what must simply be touched again to ensure it lasts. The father rises slowly from where he had been crouched, his knees stiff from the stillness, his boots crackling softly against the frozen snow beneath him, and he stretches in that deliberate, quiet way that speaks not of complaint but of acknowledgement, his body aware of time, of the cold, of the layers of habit that wrap around him like his clothes. He walks to the sled and unrolls a narrow strip of sealskin, revealing a bundle of tools wrapped inside: a knife, a bone awl, a length of spare sinew, a flat stone used for smoothing edges, and a small pouch of waxed thread. These are the items that are not used constantly, but are always needed, kept clean and dry, and ready for the quiet moments between fishing, when the mind and the hands can turn toward care and maintenance, rather than waiting and watching. The mother joins him, kneeling beside the sled and beginning to inspect the bindings of the spear shaft, running her fingers slowly along the seams, checking for any signs of stress or moisture. And when she finds one spot where the wrap has come slightly loose from the haft, she does not sigh or frown. She simply reaches for the awl and begins the process of unwinding, rethreading, and rebinding with practiced ease. Her motions slow and fluid, not rushed but entirely purposeful. Beside her, the older boy unwinds a line from a storage reel and lays it out straight on the snow, pressing down the curled ends, inspecting the knots where the hook is tied, and then rubbing the length of it between his palms to warm and soften the fibers. The younger boy, seated nearby with his legs tucked under him, begins sharpening the edge of a small bone tool against a stone, his tongue poking out slightly from the corner of his mouth in concentration, his strokes slow and careful as he tries to mimic the movement he has seen his father make 1,000 times. The grandmother watches them all with eyes half-lidded, one hand folded beneath her chin, the other resting on her lap. Not asleep, but resting in the way one rests after years of doing the same work, able to sense when something is being done correctly without needing to inspect it, hearing the right sound of a blade on stone or the steady tension of thread being pulled through hide. From time to time, she lifts a hand to adjust the shawl across her shoulders or brush snow from her sleeves, her breath moving in slow, measured exhales that fog the air before fading. The dogs remain close to the sled, one or two stretching out now and then to roll onto their sides, legs twitching as they drift between light sleep and watchfulness, their ears flicking at every gust of wind, every crunch of boot or bark echoing from far across the tundra. The wind is steady now, not strong, not biting, but steady, and it moves across the surface of the snow with the consistency of a hand stroking fur, smoothing the drifts, brushing along the sled's wooden edges, lifting tiny crystals into swirling spirals that glint briefly in the diffused daylight before settling again. No one speaks. The tools say enough, the sound of sinew threading through holes, of hide being pulled taut, of stone meeting bone. All of these are familiar, quiet conversations between people and the things they trust to help them survive. When one repair is finished, another is begun. A strap on the sled is tightened. A boot sole is checked. A notch in the spear shaft is gently reworked. These are not chores, but traditions, rituals of preservation, ways of saying to the land, we are still here, still doing what must be done, still honoring the cycle that lets us live. In this silence, the snow gathers slowly again on shoulders, on the sled, on the unfinished tasks, and each flake is brushed away gently, not hurriedly, as if to say yes, we see you, we accept your presence, but not just yet. We have one more knot to tie, one more edge to smooth, one more piece of thread to pull through, before we sit back again, watching the lines, waiting for the next pull from the water, or the quiet that says it's time to return. With the final threads tied, the tools repacked, and the hides folded neatly over the repaired gear, the family slowly returns to their fishing spots beside the hole in the ice, not in a rush, not because they expect anything new, but because this is what follows, the natural continuation after the hands have worked, the eyes have scanned the sled, and the breath has settled into its deeper rhythm again. The father lowers the line back into the water, watching as the hook vanishes into the still blackness, as if returning a thought to the depths of silence, letting it drift where he cannot see. His movements are automatic now, shaped by hundreds of repetitions, each knot in the line familiar beneath his gloves, every curve of the bone hook pressed into his memory, like a signature, like a signature. Beside him, the older boy mimics the same gesture, casting his line with careful steadiness, his hands sure and quiet, his eyes less expectant now, more accepting of the long, slow way the water gives or does not. The mother sits with her legs tucked beneath her, a fresh wrap around her shoulders, watching the dogs now, observing the way they've formed a loose semicircle near the sled, their heads resting on crossed paws, their eyes only half closed, alert even in their seeming stillness. The wind has slowed again, and in its place is an unusual hush, as if the entire expanse of snow and sky has paused for breath, waiting with the family in an unspoken truce of stillness. The younger child sits cross-legged near the ice, building a new shape in the snow. Not a tower this time, but something flatter. A circle, maybe a map, maybe nothing at all. And he traces patterns into the surface with a smooth stone, not concerned with how long it will last, only with the way the cold resists and yields beneath his touch. The grandmother reclines slightly, leaning against the folded pack behind her, her hands now idle in her lap, one thumb brushing absently across her palm in a rhythm known only to her. She does not look at the water, nor at the sky, but at the thin trail of snow caught in the wind, a white ribbon curling and rising before falling apart again, as if it were a story beginning but never needing to end. No new words are spoken. There is nothing that must be said. Even the fire of activity from the repairs has faded now, leaving only the soft aftermath, the way silence returns and stretches out like a fur laid flat across the ground, covering everything in a shared sense of completion. The shadows remain subtle, barely shifting beneath the clouded sky, but the family senses the passage of time in their bones, in the weight of clothing against skin, in the deepening of the cold along the edges of their boots. Occasionally, a line shifts, not with a pull, but with the slow sway of water below, and each time, the family glances, just briefly, before returning to their watch. A bird passes overhead, its wings outstretched against the pale light, and it moves so slowly it seems suspended in time, a single black mark drifting through the expanse, unhurried and alone. The older boy follows it with his eyes, and the younger one reaches for it with his hand, fingers outstretched, then lets them fall back into his lap. The grandmother closes her eyes again, not to sleep, but to listen more deeply, and the faint sound of the father's breath, the mother's shifting feet, the dog's occasional sighs, all combine into a hum that is almost like a song, though no one is singing. The lines remain still. The water does not speak. The snow continues to fall, light and unbothered, collecting in the spaces between movement and breath, settling across sleeves, dogs' backs, the edges of the sled. It covers the circle drawn by the child, softening the lines, erasing them with kindness. And as they wait, not for anything, but simply in the act of waiting, the family becomes part of the stillness once more, an extension of the land, of the snow, of the endless pause between sky and ice. No sound rises, no change occurs, and yet everything continues, slowly, softly, without beginning or end. Though the hour cannot be measured in precise moments or told from the position of the sun, the light begins to change in a way that those who live by the ice can feel before they see. A slight dimming of contrast, the way snow begins to reflect less and absorb more of the gray sky above. A subtle cooling of the wind's touch on cheeks, and a faint ache in the fingers that tells of approaching evening, even before shadows start to stretch. The family does not react with suddenness to this change. There is no signal, no announcement that the day is moving toward its next chapter. Instead, they begin to notice smaller things, details that only appear when the light starts to fade. The father, sitting beside the ice hole, watches how the water now mirrors less of the sky and more of the dark, as though the lake below is waking up in reverse, becoming opaque where it had been translucent, more shadow than surface. His line remains steady, untouched by fish, but he does not pull it in. He continues to hold it loosely in one hand, not with expectation, but with the patient respect of someone who knows the difference between absence and refusal. The older boy looks down at his gloves and sees the snow that has gathered on the backs, not new or heavy, just a thin crust of crystals that sparkle less now, their edges dulling as the sky thickens. He brushes them off slowly, methodically, watching them fall and vanish into the layers already beneath him. The younger child traces his finger along the small ridge he built earlier, following the shape like a trail, but the snow has begun to fill in his design, softening the clean lines, and rather than fix it, he lets it happen, gently patting the surface as if to thank the snow for completing what he began. The mother unrolls a second fur wrap and drapes it over the tools not in use, her hands lingering longer over each item than before, not to warm them, but to mark the end of their usefulness for today. She checks the knot on the hide-wrapped fish and tightens it, though it doesn't need tightening, an act of closure more than necessity. The grandmother, who has not spoken since morning, clears her throat quietly, a sound like wind brushing through driftwood, and shifts her seat slightly closer to the sled, tucking her feet beneath her and resting both hands on her knees. She watches the dogs now, their ears no longer twitching with alertness, but turned inward, their bodies curling tighter as the light fades, conserving heat and energy, knowing without instruction that the day is winding down. The birds that passed overhead earlier have disappeared now, or perhaps they've simply flown lower, into the shadows where the eye does not follow. The sky remains the same color, but something within it has shifted, the way a drum beat slows without changing its sound, or the way a song can fall silent between notes without truly stopping. The wind carries a colder bite now, not fierce, but pointed, brushing against the back of the neck in a way that makes the body instinctively want to turn inward, to pull the fur closer, to seek shelter, not from storm, but from duration. The father finally pulls in his line, winding it in slow coils and brushing the ice from each knot before tucking the hook into the padding near the chisel. The boy does the same, mirroring his father's posture, not disappointed, but content, his line clean, his hands steady. The mother rises to gather the food pouch, checking that it is still sealed, running her thumb along the seam where it was stitched long ago. The grandmother stands with a small sound of effort, leaning slightly on her stick, not because of weakness, but because she has learned the kindness of supporting herself. The youngest child tucks the stone he had been carving with into his mitten, keeping it warm for no particular reason. Together, they move a little closer to one another, the space between them narrowing as the cold spreads slowly around the fishing hole. The ice below them remains still. The snow continues to fall, finer now, lighter, almost like dust settling over a scene that has remained unchanged for centuries. The wind hums, the light dims, and the family prepares, not to leave just yet, but to begin the long, slow act of preparing to return. First in thought, then in motion, then in silence, as the light continues to fade into a softer, cooler version of itself, the snow falling in finer, more deliberate flakes. The family begins the slow transition from stillness to movement once more, not with sudden gestures or loud words, but with quiet motions that acknowledge the day's nearing end, a shared awareness that it is time to begin the journey back toward warmth and shelter, to close the circle of labor and return to rest. The father is the first to rise completely, unfolding his limbs with the kind of care that comes not from fatigue, but from understanding that even standing is part of the rhythm here, something to be done slowly, with attention to balance and breath. He moves to the sled with quiet purpose, brushing off the new snow that has settled over the gear, shaking it from the outer furs and wooden frame with wide sweeps of his gloved hands, the motion slow and wide, like someone clearing a memory rather than an object. The dogs rise too, one by one, their muscles stretching with fluid ease, their thick fur flecked with frost, eyes bright but calm as they step into place beside the sled, their bodies already anticipating the tug of harness and the feel of packed snow beneath their paws. The mother begins collecting the smaller items, wrapping the tools again in their designated furs, securing the hides with long strips of sinew, each knot tied with the same care as the first, because every item, no matter how simple, matters in a land where forgetting is never kind. The older boy silently rolls his line and stores it alongside his father's, mimicking every movement without being told, the learning already inside his hands. The younger child gathers up his stone and smooths the snow where he had been sitting, not because anyone asked him to, but because he wants to leave it as it was, flat and clean, like a blank page. Waiting for the next drawing, the grandmother places her hand once on the top of the sled, resting there for a moment, before slowly making her way toward it, her walking stick marking the snow with light indentations, each step deliberate, stable, and known. There is no urgency to their packing, no rushing to beat the dark, because the dark here is not feared. It is expected. It is part of the design. Something that accompanies them home, like an old friend walking behind at a polite distance. The wind has calmed again, curling gently around their legs, whispering around the sled's corners, raising tiny flurries that vanish almost as soon as they form. The father tightens the bindings around the loaded sled, checking each strap twice, then once more, not because he doubts his work, but because the cold has a way of loosening what was once secure. The mother helps fasten the harness to the dogs, her touch brief and confident, her movements guided by memory and pattern rather than instruction. When everything is in place and all is packed, the family stands still for a moment beside the fishing hole, now filling slowly with snow again, the rim softening, the opening fading back into the landscape, as if the water below were never disturbed, as if the ice had never been broken, the land erasing their presence with gentleness rather than indifference. No one speaks, but each of them looks at it just for a moment longer, as if to say, "Thank you," not aloud, but inwardly, respectfully. Then the father nods once, and the dogs begin to move, their feet pressing into the trail that they know so well, their bodies shifting in unison, the sled gliding behind them like a memory made tangible, like the tail end of a dream not yet forgotten. The family begins to walk beside it, falling into the same quiet formation as before. The father leading slightly, the boys to the side, the mother adjusting the rear straps, and the grandmother walking with quiet dignity at the end. The trail behind them begins to form again, faint but true, a line pressed gently into the wide whiteness, marking their return not with announcement, but with presence. The snow continues to fall. The sky darkens by degrees, and the long journey home begins, not as an event, but as a continuation, the slow turning of another page in a story told not in words, but in footsteps, breath, and the soft press of wind against fur. The trail home, though no longer visible beneath the snow that has continued to fall in its soft, relentless way since morning, exists as surely beneath their feet as the memory of breath, unseen, unspoken, but never forgotten. And as the family makes their way slowly across the vast, open whiteness, the sled gliding quietly behind the steady movements of the dogs, they follow not a marked route, but a rhythm etched into their bones, each footstep pressing into fresh snow with the confidence of those who know a place, not by maps or signs, but by feel, by wind, by the angle of the slope beneath the surface. The sky above them has begun its shift into early twilight, though there is no dramatic sunset, only a gradual deepening of the gray, a slight cooling of the air, a dimming that folds gently over the land like a thick blanket being laid over a sleeping child. The dogs move at an even pace, not pulling hard, not dragging, their bodies well practiced in this work, their ears flicking at small sounds, perhaps distant creaks of the ice shifting in its frozen shell, or the occasional call of a snowbird unseen in the clouds. The sled leaves a light trail behind, cutting twin lines into the soft powder, and the father watches it occasionally, over his shoulder, not out of concern, but with the quiet assurance of someone for whom the sled is not a burden, but a companion, a partner in the work of each day. The mother walks beside it, one hand resting lightly on the edge, ready to adjust the covering if the wind rises, her other hand holding the strap of a small pouch, pressed close to her body. She glances at the children now and then, watching them without hovering, letting them move as they wish, their boots lifting and falling in rhythm, their coats dusted with snow, their hoods pulled low. The older boy hums quietly to himself, not a tune so much as a string of sounds that mimic the wind and the soft crunch of footsteps. The younger one trails his hand through the snow as he walks, drawing a long, wavering line beside his boot prints, watching how the powder parts around his fingers and then collapses again. The grandmother, walking a few steps behind, taps her walking stick into the snow with each step, its light thump rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat echoing against the earth. She does not hurry, nor does she lag behind, her pace matched not to the others, but to the land itself, a pace that neither outruns the cold nor invites it in. The wind rises for a moment and then falls again, brushing across the family like a long exhale, scattering fine crystals of snow across their path, tiny flakes catching briefly in the fur of hoods and on eyelashes before melting away. No one speaks, The silence is not empty, but full of shared breath, shared effort, shared memory. The land remains open around them, featureless to an unfamiliar eye, but full of meaning to theirs. The tilt of a drift here, the shape of a distant ridge there, the way the snow lies slightly deeper near the frozen stream they passed on the way out. These are the signs they follow, the landmarks that belong to them, not because they were placed there, but because they have been passed down, told through footsteps, shown in walks, remembered in bodies, rather than books. They walk steadily, not fast, not slow, just enough to stay warm without exhausting themselves, letting the motion become its own form of rest. The sled squeaks faintly as it moves, its wooden hide adjusting to the shifts in weight and terrain, and one of the dogs lets out a low breath that sounds almost like a sigh, but continues without pause. The world around them begins to blur slightly as the snow thickens, not into a storm, but into a soft veil that mutes all color and softens every shape, turning the camp in the distance into a hazy outline, still far, but no longer unseen. And when the grandmother glances up and sees the first familiar curve of the snowbank near the outer edge of their shelter, she does not call out, but smiles beneath her scarf, knowing that the walk is nearly done. Still, they do not rush. The return is as important as the departure, and the snow asks for no less respect in the end than it did at the start. So they continue forward, breath by breath, step by step, through the dimming light and the falling snow, wrapped in the soft silence of the land that has always known how to receive them back, as the familiar curves of the snowbanks and the gentle rise of the shelter's whalebone frame come fully into view through the thinning veil of snowfall. The family begins the final approach home, the soft crunch of boots deepening slightly as they step through the freshly laid snow that now covers the trail they had made earlier in the day. Their earlier footsteps completely erased, as though the land has drawn a curtain over the past, making room again for their return. The sled's runners glide more slowly now, the wood beneath creaking gently in places where the snow is wetter or packed unevenly, and the dogs begin to ease their pace, as if sensing that their part is nearly complete, their breaths heavier but even, their movements still calm, unhurried, and proud. No words are exchanged as they come upon the entrance of the shelter, the hide flap now lightly frosted along the seams, faint patterns of ice tracing tiny webs where warm air from inside once escaped and met the cold. The father steps forward first and pulls the flap open, his movements deliberate, careful not to let too much snow fall inward, and warm air, soft, barely warmer than the cold outside, but different in texture and scent, drifts toward them in a quiet cloud, carrying with it the familiar traces of oil, hide, and fire. One by one, they begin to enter, each pausing before the doorway to brush the snow from their outer layers, running hands over shoulders and sleeves, patting down the legs of trousers, shaking boots free of clinging powder. The mother helps the younger boy remove his hood, then lifts him gently by the elbow as he steps up into the threshold, and he murmurs a thank you, so faint it is more vibration than voice. Inside, the grandmother has already made her way to her usual place near the back wall, sitting on a folded fur with her hands pressed to her knees, eyes half closed, her body slowly adjusting from cold to warmth like a glacier melting one slow drop at a time. The boys remove their outer boots and line them up neatly beside the door, the older helping the younger, both of them tucking their mittens carefully into the sleeves of their coats, their movements as practiced as breathing. The dogs settle down near the outer wall of the shelter, curling into tight circles on the straw and fur bedding laid out for them, the sound of their breathing quickly syncing with the softer rhythm of the interior. The father begins unpacking the sled, untying the bindings with a slow hand, checking that each knot comes free without jerking, each fur still dry, each bundle accounted for. The mother prepares a place for the newly caught fish, unrolling a cool, flat piece of hide near the food storage area and gently laying the fish down in a single layer, her fingers brushing snow from their bodies before folding the hide back over them with care. The room begins to warm, not from a fire, but from the body heat of the family, from the absence of wind, from the gathering of breath and movement and quiet work. All of it shared in this intimate space where even stillness radiates comfort. The grandmother hums again, this time just a few notes, not a song, not even a tune, more like the echo of something remembered or a sound made to welcome the moment rather than mark it. The younger boy curls beside her soon after, resting his head on a pillow made from tightly packed moss wrapped in cloth, blinking slowly as his body sinks into the warmth, the fur-lined interior gently cocooning him from the outside world. The older boy joins his mother, helping her sort through the remaining items from the sled, his fingers still a bit stiff, but steady. The father closes the flap gently, sealing the last of the cold air outside. The snow continues to fall just beyond the shelter's walls, pressing softly against the edges, its hush muffled now, barely heard through the thick layers of hide and snow-packed insulation. No one is in a rush. The work of the day is not done, but it has changed, become softer, quieter, more about closing than continuing. The family moves with the rhythm of unwinding, folding into rest, making room again in their bodies and their shelter for the long quiet of another night. And as the light outside fades completely into the steady twilight of Arctic evening, the home begins to glow with the warmth of presence alone. Not fire, not light, just people, resting, together, in peace. Now inside the shelter, the world, beyond its hide-lined walls, becoming only a softened memory of white and wind and snow that still falls quietly. Outside, the family begins the slow, peaceful drift into evening, not by declaration or change in tone, but by the natural lessening of movement, the lengthening of silence, and the quiet rhythm of familiar gestures, repeated with care and ease. The father sits on a low skin-covered bench near the back of the room, slowly unwinding one of the long straps used to secure the sled, inspecting it for frays or dampness with a level of focus that is more meditative than purposeful, his hands moving not from urgency, but because the feeling of sinew in his fingers helps him release the weight of the day. The mother kneels near the supply area, sorting through a set of dried meat bundles and checking their ties, counting with the faintest whisper of her breath as she touches each one, not because she fears shortage, but because the act itself brings calm and order, a small task that fits perfectly into the gentle quiet of this dimming hour. The children have retreated to their corner, huddled beneath a thick caribou hide, with only their faces showing, whispering not to converse, but to share the last soft bits of awareness before sleep claims them fully, their words half lost in the fur, drifting into the air like smoke that fades before it finds the ceiling. The grandmother, already wrapped tightly in her shawl and furs, sits upright near the center of the shelter, eyes half closed, her breath deep and slow, her expression unreadable but peaceful, her presence like a rooted tree in the center of the room, grounding everyone in the certainty that this moment is not new, but part of a long, unbroken line of evenings just like this one. A soft tapping comes from the mother's side as she uses the edge of a bone tool to knock loose a piece of ice from a cooking bowl left near the entrance, and then she pours in a small amount of warmed broth, setting it atop a flat, heated stone to coax the chill away before gently passing it toward the father. He nods once in thanks, but does not speak, taking the bowl in both hands and letting the warmth seep into his palms before sipping, the steam briefly fogging the space just before his face, then vanishing again into the surrounding air. The dogs, though outside now, have dug themselves deeper into the snow near the walls of the shelter, their movement barely audible, a shifting of limbs, a shake of fur, the muffled sigh of breath, but their closeness is felt, their curled bodies forming a circle of quiet guardianship just beyond the boundary of fur and bone. No fire burns inside, only the low glow of the seal oil lamp, its wick trimmed low, the flame flickering just enough to cast soft light against the wall behind it, creating the illusion of movement in the stretched hide, shadows shifting like smoke in slow motion. No one looks at it directly, but all feel its presence, the warm center of the space, humming in silence. Occasionally, one of the boys stirs, adjusting the blanket over his legs or pulling his arms tighter beneath the fur, and the younger one murmurs something, a thought, a question, or perhaps the edge of a dream. But the sound fades before the words take shape. The mother has stopped moving now, sitting still with her hands folded in her lap, her back straight but relaxed, her eyes watching the quiet, not searching, not focused, but simply resting there. The father places the bowl back onto the stone, now nearly empty, and leans back slightly, not to sleep yet, but to begin letting go of the wakeful world, allowing his mind to empty itself of the snow, the sled, the ice, the lines, until only breath remains. Outside, the snow continues to fall, unchanged in its rhythm, its presence now as natural as air, drifting down upon the shelter in steady layers that will greet them in the morning. Inside, the silence grows a little thicker, a little warmer, a little more complete. The work of the day is done. The shelter holds. The snow whispers across the roof, and evening, in its fullest form, has arrived. Not loud, not proud, but gently, fully, and forever welcome, as the gentle light from the low-burning seal oil lamp continues to cast its flickering golden glow against the hide-lined walls of the shelter, the family engages in the very last of the day's tasks, those small, necessary gestures that bring the body fully into stillness and allow the mind to begin its slow drift into rest, not with ceremony or rush, but with quiet repetition and care. The father takes a flat piece of smooth, worn bone from his kit, checking its edge, as he has done countless times before, and begins to scrape a hide near the entrance, his motions steady, methodical, and rhythmically slow, each movement accompanied by the soft rasp of bone against leather that fills the room with a gentle, repetitive sound, neither sharp nor dull, but somewhere in between, a comforting scrape that echoes just enough to settle the air. The hide, not large and already half prepared from previous days, does not require much attention, and his purpose is less about finishing and more about continuing the habit, keeping the cycle of care unbroken even on days that bring no urgency. Across the room, the mother finishes rolling up a set of cloths used earlier, folding each with precision and stacking them in a leather pouch, her fingers moving with a practiced ease that seems to require no thought at all, just the certainty of countless nights that have come before, each one ending with this same quiet tidying, the same comforting patterns. The older boy gently pours a few drops of melted fat into the flame of the lamp, feeding it with care, making sure the wick is properly upright and the light does not sputter, his face glowing faintly as he leans over it, eyes half closed in concentration, a small furrow of calm on his brow. He adjusts the dish beneath it slightly, ensuring no snow or stray moisture has pooled near its base, and then settles back down near the mother, resting one hand against the warm earth beneath the firestone. The younger child, already wrapped tightly in his sleeping furs, shifts only slightly, his breathing long and slow, eyelashes fluttering now and then as he teeters at the edge of dreams, his hand still tucked beneath his cheek, one boot dangling slightly from the blanket's edge. The grandmother leans forward just a bit to pat down one of the furs near the center of the shelter, smoothing it in long strokes, as though calming a restless thought. Her voice silent, but her gestures soothing, her presence like a warm stone at the heart of the room, anchoring without needing to move. The scraping continues for a little while, then stops. The father gently folds the hide and places it on a shelf of stacked materials along the wall, then wipes down the scraping bone with a clean cloth before wrapping it carefully in its pouch. He exhales a long, steady breath through his nose, the kind that feels like it pushes the rest of the day out from the lungs, and kneels for a moment with both hands on his thighs, staring into the flame with no particular focus. The dogs outside have fully stilled now, their breathing soft and undisturbed, snow gently covering their backs as they sleep in curled positions, nestled into the windbreak created by the side of the shelter. Inside, the silence deepens, not because sound has vanished, but because movement has slowed so completely that even small motions seem hushed, reduced to their barest elements. The mother extinguishes one small auxiliary lamp, letting the main seal oil flame carry the remaining light, dim and fluttering, its warmth extending just enough to paint long, stretching shadows onto the ceiling. making the hides overhead look like waves, frozen in mid-rise. The older boy now lies down, curling next to his brother, pulling a fur up to his chin, the edge of a yawn stretching across his face, before he blinks a final time and lets his eyes close. The father lowers himself onto his mat, lying flat with one arm tucked beneath his head, not yet asleep, but no longer awake in the full sense, his breath slowing, his body loosening into rest. The grandmother, last to lie down, adjusts the scarf over her eyes with one hand, then folds both arms across her chest in the way she always does, still, composed, and undisturbed. No one says goodnight, not because it is not felt, but because it is understood, built into the pattern of quiet closing, the slow, gentle sealing off of the day. Outside, the snow thickens just slightly, the air cooler now, but completely calm, a blanket of white folding over the camp, the sky overhead a soft canvas of silver gray, unbroken, endless, and soft. Inside, nothing moves but the flame and the breath, and the final chores are done, with the final flickers of movement now faded into stillness, and the bodies of the family resting quietly beneath their layers of fur. The shelter becomes a vessel of silence, not a hollow absence of sound, but a full and living quiet, like the deep space beneath ice or the hush of snow falling onto snow, a silence that is not empty but sacred, holding within it the breath of the day just past and the promise of another to come. The seal oil lamp burns low, its flame now a thin, golden tongue that sways ever so slightly with the draft that drifts lazily through the seams of the shelter. Not enough to chill, just enough to move the air. Its soft light stretches across the curved ceiling and dances on the ripples of the hide, making shifting shapes that no one sees now, but that fill the space with a dreamlike texture, patterns that rise and dissolve in rhythm with the slow inhaling and exhaling of those who sleep. The father, lying closest to the door, breathes deeply, one hand resting on his chest, his dreams not yet formed, but already near, hovering in the space between thought and sleep, his mind still loosely aware of the weight of the day, the sled, the dogs, the cold press of the wind, yet welcoming the release that rest allows. Beside him, the mother has shifted onto her side, her hands tucked beneath her chin, her hair partially spilled from her hood and catching the faint light like threads of silver in the dusk, her face soft, serene, untouched by worry, held in the gentle grip of exhaustion and peace. The boys, curled together like cubs, lie motionless, their faces nearly identical in rest, their blankets rising and falling in perfect unison. Their dreams surely simple, perhaps a fish wriggling at the end of a line, or a snow fort rebuilt with impossible towers, or even just the feel of fur against their cheek and the sound of a dog's breath beside them. The grandmother, ever still, rests on her back, with her hands folded as always, her breath so light it barely moves her chest, and though her eyes are closed, there is a knowing in her stillness, a presence that lingers, even in sleep, like a candle that gives off light long after the flame is gone. Outside, the snow thickens further, piling softly against the walls of the shelter, wrapping the dwelling in deeper insulation, muffling the already muted world into something almost timeless. A fox may pass nearby, its feet making no sound on the layered snow, and perhaps a snow owl lifts from a branch far in the distance, wings barely brushing the wind. But none of this disturbs the family or the dogs, whose sleep has deepened into that sacred, shared stillness that only comes when every part of the day has been fully lived. The dogs themselves are only faint outlines now beneath their snow-dusted coats, breathing evenly, ears twitching occasionally, as if responding to sounds in a dream, not in the real world. Inside, no one speaks, no one moves. The only noise is the breath, the quiet inhale and exhale of 5 lives at rest, synchronized in their slumber, a lullaby written without notes or instruments. The warmth of the shelter, built not from fire, but from togetherness, from bodies and furs and memory, holds firm through the deepening night. The lamp will burn out soon, its wick surrendering to the fuel, its final glow a small farewell to the waking world, but still it flickers gently, faithfully, like a watchful eye that promises all is well, even as sleep folds over the camp like the snow itself. And in this moment, there is no past and no future, no worry, no hunger, no need to speak or act, only this one soft slice of time, filled with breath and warmth, and the kind of silence that carries weight and meaning. This is not the end of the day, not truly. It is simply the softest part of it, where all things pause and gather themselves, where the mind can finally drift fully into the long, slow rhythm of night, held by the land, by the snow, by the shelter, and by the quiet company of those who sleep side by side, as true night settles over the land and the snow outside the shelter continues its quiet descent, covering the world in a blanket so thick and gentle that even the smallest sounds are lost before they reach the air. The interior of the family's home becomes a world entirely its own, sealed, still, and suspended within the deep breath of darkness. The flicker of the seal oil lamp has finally gone out, not with a pop or a sputter, but with the softest sigh of extinguished flame, leaving behind only a faint curl of warmth in the air, the ghost of light that once traced the walls now dissolved into complete shadow. And yet, the darkness is not empty. It is full of warmth and breath and quiet, so much quiet that it feels physical, like a fur laid over the mind, pulling gently across the thoughts until even those begin to settle into stillness. The father stirs once in his sleep, not from discomfort, but as the body shifts deeper into its rest, his hand sliding slowly from his chest to his side, fingers curling loosely around the edge of a nearby fur. His breath, now more even than ever, hums quietly, soft back and forth rhythm that matches the shape of the wind brushing over the curved roof of the shelter. The mother remains completely still, her face nestled into her hood, her lips barely parted, her dreams folded inward like the petals of a night-blooming flower, silent and unseen. The boys, tucked together, are long gone from the waking world, their chests rising and falling with such exact sameness that one might believe they share the same dream, the same internal tide, a mirrored sleep shaped by years of closeness and the gentle peace that only a deeply ordinary day can offer. The grandmother has not moved since she lay down, her hands still folded, her shoulders slack, her breath nearly invisible, yet she radiates presence, her sleep like stone resting under snow, unmoving but central to the shape of the home. Beyond, the walls, the snow presses softly against the shelter, not with weight, but with insulation, as if the sky itself is helping to cradle the space, tucking the family in, layer by layer. Occasionally, the wind rises slightly, brushing over the snowbanks in lazy arcs, and then settles again, like a great hand smoothing a blanket. The dogs do not stir. They are as much a part of this stillness now as the land itself, their bodies buried in the soft hollows they made, their breathing muffled by snow, their dreams unknown but undisturbed. The ice beneath the snow does not crack tonight. The cold has stabilized. The land settled into its nighttime equilibrium, and nothing is shifting, nothing falling. Inside, the only movement is that of breath, and even that seems to slow further, the air so saturated with sleep that it moves differently, thicker, quieter, more like fog than wind. The darkness has shape here, gentle curves and folds like the hides that form the roof, and those sleeping beneath them do not fear the absence of light. It is familiar, ancestral, known. They are held by it, the way a hand holds water, not tightly, but completely. Hours pass like this, though none are marked, and the family sleeps on, undisturbed, bodies soft, hearts slow, dreams uninterrupted by anything other than the rhythm of their own warmth. This is not merely rest, but renewal. Not only sleep, but belonging, the kind of deep comfort that roots into the bones and says, without words, that everything is as it should be. There is no sound, there is no light, there is only the fullness of night and the peace of being still within it. The hour has passed into the part of night that holds no name, when time itself seems to dissolve into the folds of the dark, and even thought becomes weightless, floating without form in the soft hush that fills the shelter like snow fills a hollow. No one stirs, no dreams ripple visibly across faces, no breath breaks the rhythm. The family sleeps on, bundled in layers of fur and silence, their bodies suspended in a shared warmth so complete that it radiates outward into the cold without losing strength. The air inside the shelter has taken on a special quality, no longer warm in the way fire warms, but in the way presence and stillness do, a warmth that has seeped into the furs, into the walls, into the space between bodies, until it becomes indistinguishable from comfort itself. The whalebone ribs of the structure creak softly now and then, not from strain, but from the small movements of the world around them, a distant shift in the weight of snow or the tightening of frozen hide, adjusting to temperature. These are not disturbances. They are lullabies in a language older than speech, sung by the shelter itself. Outside, the wind plays across the snow, like fingers across an untouched drum, low and unhurried, brushing fine crystals across the camp in wide arcs, smoothing over the tracks left earlier, erasing the lines of passage with infinite gentleness. The moon, if it is above the clouds, casts no light here, only the faintest suggestion of shape in the distance, a curved drift, a raised ridge, the shadow of the sled, now blanketed in layers of stillness. The dogs remain invisible beneath their snow cover, undisturbed by wind or sound, their breath deep and slow, their minds no longer attending to the world of sleds and commands, but to the quieter places where instinct and dream merge. Inside, the shelter is more cave than room, more cocoon than house, and the people inside more like seeds in winter soil than waking creatures, held, not hidden, waiting without knowing for the slow return of light. The father's hand remains where it fell near his side, fingers slightly curled, unmoving. The mother lies on her back now, her face turned slightly toward the ceiling, where the faint memory of firelight once traced slow shadows, but now only darkness remains. The boys have drawn closer to one another in their sleep, as if pulled by a single, invisible current, their heads nearly touching, their feet tucked against the edge of the bedding in perfect symmetry. The grandmother breathes so softly that the sound of it is less a noise than a presence, like the warmth of a stone that has held sunlight long after the sun has disappeared. The walls hold everything in, every breath, every ounce of rest, every echo of the day just past, and nothing leaks out. Even the memories of the day seem content to lie down and sleep, unneeded now, folded neatly like furs at the edge of the room. The snow continues to fall. The wind continues to hum. But inside this small shelter, time has paused, not ended, only paused, as if the world itself has agreed to wait for them to be ready again. And in that waiting, in that perfect pause, nothing is missing. There is no need for thought, for light, for movement. The deepest part of the night has arrived, and with it, the deepest part of rest, not sleep that waits for morning, but sleep that simply is, complete, whole, and held by the shape of the earth, the touch of hide, the closeness of family, and the long, slow exhale of the land itself. Inside the layered embrace of hide, fur, snow, and bone, the shelter remains a world unto itself, a floating cradle in the sea of Arctic silence, untouched by the ticking of clocks or the turning of hours, held entirely within the slow rhythm of breathing bodies and the memory of warmth. Outside, the snow has thickened yet again, layering itself upon the camp with such delicacy that its weight is never felt, only absorbed, its endless descent, filling every hollow, every footprint, every forgotten indentation with smooth white, quiet, until the land becomes seamless, continuous, undisturbed. The sled is barely visible now beneath its frosted shroud, its outline soft as if it were drawn in chalk and then smudged by a gentle hand. The dogs, curled into their sleeping burrows, exhale short clouds of breath that melt into the snow before they rise, their bodies heat-wrapped in fur and drifted snow, more like breathing mounds than animals, yet completely at peace in their stillness. Nothing calls, nothing howls. Even the wind has lowered its voice to a whisper, brushing gently against the shelter as though reluctant to interrupt what is happening within. And inside, there is no difference between rest and being. Each body nestled in the shelter has surrendered fully to the timeless space, where consciousness floats like a feather on deep water, drifting slowly without aim. The father does not dream with images, but with sensations, distant echoes of movement, of holding a line in cold fingers, of wind brushing past his cheek, of pulling a fur tight against the chest. Not memories so much as impressions, weightless, unnamed, flowing across his sleeping thoughts like slow shadows in the dark. The mother is deeper still, breath imperceptible, except for the subtle rise and fall of her chest beneath the furs, her face serene, untouched by tension, her entire body folded into the fabric of night as if she has become part of the shelter itself. The boys do not stir. Their breathing is one sound, their bodies a single curve of warmth joined beneath the hide. And in their sleep, they are not children, not learners, not seekers. They are simply presence, folded neatly into the rhythm of the world, untouched by urgency or fear. The grandmother, wrapped tight in her silence, remains a statue of peace, her hands still folded, her back straight even in slumber, her body so at rest that it hums invisibly with stillness, like the low vibration of earth beneath snow. The inside of the shelter has taken on the scent of long-rested warmth, oil, hide, breath, fur, sleep, all combined into a perfume that speaks not to the nose, but to the memory, a smell that lives in the bones, comforting and complete. No one will wake for hours. There is no reason to, no shift in the world sharp enough to break the seal of this night. And even if a sound were to come, an animal's call, a shift in the wind, the distant crack of ice, it would drift around the shelter like smoke, never entering, never disturbing. The land, the snow, the people, all are in agreement. This moment is for rest alone. The pressure of time, the demands of work, the cold of the outside, all have paused, left at the threshold, like unwelcome guests. Inside, everything is still, everything is slow, everything is held. The bones of the shelter do not creak. The breath of the sleepers does not falter. The snow outside continues to fall. And in this pure hour of unmeasured night, where no voice calls and no thought rises, the Inuit family sleeps beneath the soft weight of peace, their small corner of the world preserved, untouched, wrapped in the silence of a life lived in rhythm, with snow, shadow, and stars unseen. In the long hours where night shows no sign of passing, and the sky beyond the shelter is only a deeper shade of the snow that has fallen for what feels like forever, the inside of the Inuit family's dwelling remains exactly as it was, unchanged, unbothered, untouched, held within a kind of sacred pause, where nothing is expected and nothing is required except the quiet continuation of breath and warmth, the soft walls of stretched hide, and the smooth bones that hold them aloft seem to breathe with the family, rising almost imperceptibly with the gathering heat and exhaling gently as the shelter settles more fully into the snowbank that now surrounds it entirely, sealing its occupants within a sphere of absolute stillness. The wind outside no longer speaks in gusts or whistles, but has become a kind of slow inhaling, like the breathing of the earth itself, rolling low across the landscape, in waves too wide to see, too slow to feel, pressing snow into curves and slopes that no one will notice until morning. And within, the family sleeps as they have slept countless nights before, their bodies arranged in a configuration not planned but perfected over years, the adults forming the outer edges of warmth, and the children nestled at the core, like kindling that glows beneath steady logs. The father's brow remains smooth in rest, his hands unclenched, no longer thinking of lines or hooks or knots, his body softened into the shape of sleep in a way that suggests not just fatigue, but deep trust in the shelter, in the snow, in the cycle of days that always returns to this place of stillness. The mother has not shifted position, though the weight of the fur blanket has settled more closely around her, conforming to her shape with a kind of gentle reverence, as if the warmth of the room itself were tucking her in. The boys, who once whispered beneath the hides, are now deeply asleep, their heads turned toward each other, breaths mingling in the narrow space between them, their dreams untroubled, shaped by the softness of the world around them rather than anything they saw or heard that day. The grandmother, who lies nearest the wall, sleeps as though she has always been asleep, her rest so complete that it no longer resembles sleep at all, but instead a state of total stillness that belongs more to the snow outside than to any person, a presence so steady that even silence seems to form itself around her. No creature passes by, no light flickers, no sudden change occurs. Time, in this hour, is not a movement, but a texture, thick, slow, and soft, pressing gently around every shape and every breath, holding them not in place, but in grace. The only shifts are those that happen too slowly to notice. The cooling of the last warmth from the extinguished lamp, the faint contraction of the wooden sled frame just outside the wall as the cold deepens, the gradual thickening of the snow cover above. Inside, the air is warm enough to soften the cheeks, but cool enough to remind the skin of the world beyond. No dreams disturb the stillness. They flow quietly beneath sleep, like slow-moving water beneath ice, unseen but present, smooth and dark and calm. The firs hold every breath, the floor absorbs every sound, and even the dogs outside, still blanketed and curled, seem to belong to the same rhythm, the same quiet order of night. In this moment, and all the ones that follow it, the camp does not age, does not shift, does not prepare for morning. It simply remains, a closed blossom of human life, folded into the wider landscape, sleeping not just through the night, but with it as part of it, suspended in the soft hush that only the deep Arctic dark can give. No thought breaks the surface, no word is needed. All is held, and all is still. In the hour when even the stars, hidden behind layers of clouds and falling snow, seem to pause in their distant orbits, the Inuit family's shelter remains utterly motionless, a silent cocoon buried beneath thick drifts of white, shaped by human hands, but now indistinguishable from the landscape itself. A small bump in the snow, a forgotten shadow of warmth beneath an endless sky. Unnoticed and undisturbed, the interior of the shelter has cooled slightly now, not uncomfortably, but noticeably, the kind of gentle cooling that happens when every ember of warmth has been folded in, conserved by bodies wrapped in furs and sleep, with no lamp to lend its flicker, no movement to stir the air. The darkness is total, but it does not feel heavy. It feels natural, surrounding the family not as a threat or a void, but as a cushion, a perfectly tailored absence of light that allows the body to release its last traces of wakefulness. The father's form lies long and still, his shoulders relaxed, his chest rising in such slow, measured intervals that the passage of breath becomes a soft rhythm beneath the shelter's silence, like the gentle lap of a water against a shore long after the tide has turned. The mother, now curled slightly in sleep, one arm drawn across her chest and her fingers resting lightly against her collarbone, dreams without images, her rest so deep that the world could shift outside the shelter and she would not wake. The boys remain nestled in their shared corner, their warmth pooled between them, their legs tangled beneath the furs. In that unspoken way siblings find comfort through proximity alone, their soft breaths creating a faint warmth cloud in the space above them, fading quickly into the air but still rising in perfect, unconscious coordination. The grandmother's outline is barely visible, but her presence anchors the room, as steady in sleep as she is in waking life. A stillness that seems to extend beyond the body, filling the air around her with a calm that requires no explanation, no effort, no sound. Outside, the snow has thickened into a perfect seal. The shelter's roof, now fully insulated by the layers of snow that have fallen for hours without pause, creating a barrier against wind and noise, against temperature shifts and intrusions. The night pressing evenly on all sides like a blanket made not from fabric but from the sky itself. No one speaks, no one dreams aloud. The dogs remain buried in their shallow nests, invisible beneath their coats of snow, their breath softened into silence, their bodies in perfect rest. Even the wind has gone still, caught in its own moment of suspension, as if the world has entered a breath between breaths, a pause that no clock will measure. Inside the shelter, there is nothing left to do, no stories to tell, no chores to complete, no hunger to satisfy, no fire to tend. Everything needed has been done, and all that remains is this: the sharing of space, the quiet rhythm of sleep, the miracle of warmth and stillness held together in one small place. The hides creak faintly, only as they settle into their own weight, and the ground beneath the sleeping forms holds its warmth, like a promise whispered in a language too old to speak. This is not merely night. It is the innermost fold of it, the part that holds the essence of everything simple and sacred, the silence of breath, the weight of fur, the rhythm of hearts at peace. And so, the shelter, beneath its dome of snow and sky, floats through the deep night like a boat in still water, untouched by tide, unshaken by time, carrying its precious cargo of sleep and life through the endless, perfect quiet, somewhere far outside the shelter's walls, beyond the deep layering of snow and the wide, cloud-blanketed sky. The world continues to turn, stars burn, and distant animals shift through frozen valleys in search of movement or meaning. But inside the tiny, rounded home, carved from nothing more than hide, bone, snow, and patience. None of it matters, for here, night has expanded to fill every corner of thought and time, erasing the need for morning or memory, holding every sleeping form in a silence so profound it feels as though even the air has forgotten how to echo. The walls do not speak, the bones of the structure do not creak. The snow above has compacted into a thick dome of muffling softness, pressing gently downward with the weight of countless quiet flakes, sealing in the stillness, insulating each breath and dream with an unshakable calm. The father lies flat on his back, limbs heavy with sleep, one leg slightly bent where the fur folded beneath it. Yet no discomfort shows on his face, only that slack, open expression of a man who trusts the world enough to rest deeply in it. The mother has turned once in the long hours, now lying on her side, her arm flung across the empty air between her and the boys, a gesture that began in sleep and ended in warmth, her fingers resting on the edge of the furs that cover them all. The two boys have not moved much, perhaps a small twitch of a foot, the reflexive drawing in of an arm during a dream, but otherwise they remain as they were, pressed closely together beneath their shared cover, wrapped in the heat of each other and the comfort of knowing that nothing will ask anything of them before they are ready to rise. The grandmother lies in perfect stillness, her breath so shallow and slow that it blends with the rhythm of the shelter itself, her long experience having taught her that the deepest rest is not only permitted but necessary, earned each day through steady steps and quiet resilience. The oil lamp remains unlit, the cooking stones are cold, the food supplies rest untouched. Even the dogs outside, normally so alert to shifts in weather or subtle changes in scent, remain coiled and quiet, covered by layers of snow that now form their own kind of shelter, alive only in the slow expansion and contraction of their breathing. The wind, which earlier whispered through cracks and rustled the outside of the shelter, has gone utterly still, as if the whole land has exhaled and forgotten to breathe in again. A wide pause stretched across the landscape where no change is needed and none will come until the sky decides it is time. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of life at rest. Fur, oil, breath, skin, and snow. A scent that speaks not to the nose, but to the body itself, calming it in the oldest way, reminding it that sleep is safe, that nothing sharp waits just beyond the edge of dreams. Even the thoughts that sometimes flicker in sleep seem slowed, thickened by the cold, by the peace, drifting gently in the minds of the sleepers, without urgency or shape, like smoke caught in still air. Time, in this moment, has no lines, no marks, no passing, only presence, only this one long, seamless continuation of stillness. It is the kind of night that has always existed in the north, in the deep places where snow smooths all edges, where families lie bundled in close rooms, built by hand and heart, and where the outside world disappears until it is called again by light. Nothing stirs, nothing breaks, and in the middle of all that unbroken quiet, 5 sleeping figures breathe in unison, their hearts slow, their warmth shared, their shelter strong, and the world outside waits, unchanged and unchanging, until the first whisper of dawn dares return. Though no one in the shelter stirs, and the snow-covered camp remains wrapped in absolute darkness. The night has entered that invisible phase when it is no longer deepening, no longer thickening, but instead beginning imperceptibly, slowly, silently to loosen its grip, like the final exhale at the end of a long sleep, even if no one yet senses the change. There is no visible light, no golden hue on the horizon, no shift in the shadows against the hides of the shelter, but something almost imperceptible has begun. A slight easing in the depth of stillness, a barely there tension slipping away from the bones of the structure, a whisper of air that carries the scent of snow, not as it falls, but as it settles. Inside, the family remains unchanged in their arrangement, still wrapped in warmth, still unmoving, still folded deep in the quiet surrender of night. But the space itself begins to respond to the slow rotation of the earth, to the truth that dawn, however distant, is no longer impossibly far away. The father breathes deeply, not in waking, but in a way that marks the end of the longest phase of rest, a breath that travels slightly deeper into the chest and exits with the faintest sound, as though the body knows before the mind that a new day is on its way. The mother's brow shifts, just barely, an unconscious flicker beneath the skin, not from worry, not from discomfort, but as a thread of mourning begins to weave its way through her dreaming mind. The boys remain still, but one leg shifts under the furs, curling slightly closer to the other as their bodies, guided by instinct rather than awareness, begin the slow journey back from the far edges of sleep. The grandmother remains in her perfect stillness, a monument of peace in the darkest hour. But even the air around her seems lighter now, not as close or thick, not as still. The dogs outside, buried under a soft dome of snow, twitch once, their breath a little sharper now, their ears subtly adjusting to the new tension in the air. A readiness not yet acted on, but present. The snow has quieted, slowed, softened, no longer falling in thick, silent layers, but drifting now in thinner waves, smaller flakes spaced farther apart, as though the sky itself is preparing to change roles from covering to revealing. Inside, there is still no light, no noise, no movement strong enough to break the spell of night. But the shelter holds a different kind of quiet now. Not the deep, resting silence of midnight, but the expectant hush of something gently approaching, something old and familiar and promised. The hide walls have begun to cool slightly, not from wind, but from the subtle shift in the outside air as it begins to thin in preparation for dawn's first breath. The structure creaks, not loudly, but once, one soft groan of ice or bone, adjusting to the slight contraction of temperature that signals a pause before the cold of morning arrives. Still, no one wakes, no eyes open, but within each sleeping body lies the smallest stirrings of change, the final cycles of a dream, the curling and uncurling of fingers beneath furs, the growing presence of awareness just beneath the surface of sleep. Outside, the sky remains dark, but with a darkness that no longer feels endless, one that now carries the memory of light in it, the same way the snow carries the warmth of footsteps long since covered. Nothing breaks this moment. There is no alarm, no call, no light switch to flip. There is only this natural, invisible edge, this place where night no longer deepens and morning has not yet begun, a breath held gently between darkness and dawn. And in that breath, in that perfect pause, the shelter continues to hum with the rhythm of sleep. The snow continues to lie heavy but welcoming, and the family continues to rest, as if the world outside has promised to wait for them just a little longer, as the horizon, far beyond the snow-blanketed shelter, begins its slow, silent conversation with the coming day. There is no great change yet, no bold crack of color across the sky, or sudden warmth that falls through cracks in the wall. Only a softening, an almost imperceptible lifting of the darkness that has rested so fully over the land for so many hours. The snow, which has long since completed its steady descent, now lies motionless, untouched, pristine, its surface gently curved and smooth, like an undisturbed sea frozen mid-wave. Around the shelter, the snow has formed soft, wind-sculpted ridges that cradle the structure more tightly than ever, pressing its sides like a sleeping animal curled for warmth. Inside, the family is still at rest, but the energy within the shelter has changed, subtly but undeniably, as though the space itself has begun to wake before the bodies it contains. The father shifts slightly, the first meaningful movement in many hours, his chest expanding in a long, quiet breath, and his fingers twitch once against the fur, not fully conscious, but responding to the almost invisible signal that the deep part of the night has passed. The mother exhales, more audibly now, her breath no longer just an unconscious reflex, but tinged with the faint murmur of waking, the long, slow drift back from the edge of sleep beginning its work. One of the boys lets out a quiet, unconscious murmur, just a sound, a syllable from a dream, carried into the air like mist. But he does not wake, instead curling more tightly beneath the furs, anchoring himself in the warmth for just a little longer. The grandmother remains a stone of silence, a steady figure wrapped in stillness, but even she, beneath layers of rest and ritual, begins to sense the change, the gentle pull of the world returning to motion. The dogs outside, sensing the same subtle shift, begin to stir beneath their mounds of snow, not fully emerging, but adjusting, sniffing at the air through frost-covered snouts, their ears lifting slightly toward the sky. The air outside carries a different scent now, not the dense, saturated cold of midnight, but the thinner, more spacious chill of the hours just before light, tinged with the barest hint of movement, of snow relaxing, of ice thinking about melting far in the future. Inside, the shelter feels smaller now, not constricted, but cozier, as if the breath of the sleepers has swelled to fill it entirely, making the space feel rounder, softer, more complete. The furs rustle faintly as the older boy turns in his sleep, drawing one arm across his chest and brushing the shoulder of his brother, who responds with a quiet sigh, and then all goes still again. But it is a different stillness now, not the motionless weight of deep night, but the kind of stillness that belongs to a place about to change, a moment just before music begins, when every note is waiting in perfect silence. The wind has not returned, but the air carries a faint tension, like the pull of thread just before it's drawn through fabric. Light has not yet touched the shelter, but its coming has been declared by everything around it. The way the snow holds its shape more clearly, the way the silence seems thinner, less eternal, and in this moment, the family sleeps not as they did in the deepest night, but as those who are about to wake, whose rest is ending not because it must, but because it has reached its fullness. No alarm, no voice, no signal will rouse them. It is the land that will do it. The natural agreement between snow and sun, between the body and the cold, between life and light. But not yet, for now they remain tucked in their circle of warmth, suspended in that final, precious hour of night, when dreams begin to drift upward, when breath becomes a little deeper, and when even the silence starts to listen for the very first sound of morning, just beyond the sealed dome of snow and hide, where night has reigned unbroken for what seems like a lifetime of hours, a faint change begins to draw itself across the sky, a slight thinning in the darkness, a deep blue light that is not yet sunrise, but carries the memory of it, like the soft echo of a drumbeat still lingering in the air long after the last note. The stars, veiled behind heavy cloud for most of the night, are still hidden, but the sky itself is no longer absolute. It is beginning to shift in hue from charcoal to slate, from slate to ash, and soon to that quiet, expectant blue that signals the world's return from sleep. The snow that lies heavy on the shelter's roof has taken on a subtle sheen now, a reflection of something distant and upward, and even this small change begins to influence the air within. Inside, the family is beginning, slowly and without words, to return from the vast stillness of sleep. The father rolls one shoulder beneath the furs, his face still slack with rest, but touched now by the faintest wrinkle of awareness, as though the sensation of change has brushed against him without asking. His fingers uncurl, twitch once, then rest again, waiting. The mother lets out a long breath, quiet but fuller than before, her chest rising beneath the thick hide coverings in a motion that feels almost ceremonial, a breath that belongs not just to her, but to the morning itself. The boys remain nestled close, but the younger shifts his leg beneath the shared bedding, pulling it inward, and then rests again, still deeply asleep, but no longer fully suspended in the unreachable realm of night. The older boy's head turns slightly on the bundled cloth that serves as his pillow, a small crease appearing between his brows, not from discomfort, but from the body's gentle climb back toward waking, one slow heartbeat at a time. The grandmother remains as always, her form as still as driftwood, frozen in a snowbank. Yet her breath has deepened in the way that breath does just before the return of movement. Nothing is rushed, nothing is stirred by urgency. The transition is so gradual that it might go unnoticed entirely, were it not for the air, which now feels ever so slightly different, lighter, drier, touched with the chill of early day rather than the heavy cold of endless night. The dogs outside begin to rise before the people do, their senses attuned to shifts in air pressure and faint changes in scent. A soft rustling comes from beneath the snowbanks that have covered them through the night. Not frantic or noisy, but tentative and slow, as if they too feel the weight of stillness beginning to lift and are gently brushing it off with careful pause. A nose pokes through the surface of the snow, steam rising in little clouds as it tests the morning air, which carries the promise of motion, of light, of work yet to be done. Inside, the shelter breathes as a whole now. Furs rustle, limbs stretch beneath blankets, and the silence, though still dominant, has taken on a different tone. No longer the deep, endless quiet of night, but the pregnant pause that holds the future in it, the moment between knowing one is asleep and choosing to wake. The walls of hide seem to respond too, softening their tension, adjusting slightly to the change in pressure as the outside world prepares to flood them with light once more. No one speaks yet. The father has not opened his eyes. The mother remains tucked into her layers, but every breath drawn now carries with it a trace of awareness, a suggestion of readiness, like the earth itself beneath snow, beginning to feel the sun's return. Outside, the sky continues its slow transformation, the clouds above still gray, but now tinged faintly with silver, and the snow on the ground beginning to cast the faintest shadows, long, diffused, and so soft they almost seem imagined. Morning is not here, but it is near, and the family, still wrapped in sleep's embrace, is no longer adrift in the depth of night, but floating gently toward the shore of day, where warmth, movement, and voices await. Just not yet, not for a few more blessed, silent minutes. The moment when night gives way to morning in the far Arctic is not announced with fanfare or light bursting over the hills, but with a delicate and deliberate shift in tone, an almost ceremonial softening of shadow, a slow loosening of the dense fabric of darkness that has wrapped the land like a shroud all through the long hours of stillness and inside the Inuit shelter. That change is now becoming undeniable, not abrupt or dramatic, but unmistakable all the same. The space, once silent in its full stillness, now hums with a new kind of energy, faint and rhythmic, as if each breath drawn by the sleeping bodies carries with it a gentle echo of the world that is waiting just beyond the walls. The father moves first, his eyes still closed, but his arms adjusting beneath the weight of the furs, one hand stretching slowly outward, testing the air with fingers that curl against the fabric of a long-used hide. And though he does not rise, his body tells the truth. The sleep that once held him has begun to release its grip. The mother, sensitive to every motion in the shelter, even while half dreaming, responds almost simultaneously, her face turning slightly toward the sound of her husband's breath shifting, her brow softening into a kind of half-smile that only appears during this exact transition, neither fully in sleep nor yet in wakefulness. She remains still, not from weariness, but from reverence for the moment, knowing from long experience that there is something sacred about these few last minutes before a day begins. One of the boys, perhaps the younger, lets out a quiet, breathy murmur, a string of syllables that belong to no language and no thought, but which slip into the air like mist before a thaw, and then rolls slightly onto his side, his small body curling more tightly under the cover of warmth, resisting the pull of morning for just a few more precious moments. The older boy is already half awake, though he keeps his eyes closed, listening to the subtle cues of movement and breath around. Him, taking inventory of the room through sound and feel rather than sight, measuring the new tone in the air, the almost imperceptible difference in temperature and light that signals the approaching end of rest. The grandmother remains at rest, her breath as deep and steady as it was through the entire night. But even she, beneath her practiced stillness, has shifted. The angle of her body adjusted slightly, the weight of her limbs less anchored to sleep, and more responsive to the slow drawing in of light through the snow-filtered seams of the shelter's roof. The walls themselves now seem to reflect the change, no longer blank and dark, but subtly illuminated by the low, diffuse light of early dawn that filters through the hide with a color that is neither white nor blue, but something between, kind of glowing gray that makes every surface seem soft and familiar. The air inside the shelter has cooled just a little more as the outside temperature adjusts to morning, but the collective warmth of the family still dominates the space, still holds the chill at bay. Outside, the dogs begin to rise more fully, now shaking snow from their coats in slow, practiced motions, sniffing the air with alert but unhurried interest, stretching their limbs in silence. The sled, once buried beneath a mound of untouched snow, is now beginning to cast a faint shadow across the drifts, its curved runners barely visible as the first rays of light break past the clouds in slivers rather than beams. There is no hurry. The camp remains quiet, but there is motion now, unmistakable and steady. Sleep no longer holds the room, as it did. Instead, what remains is something else, a kind of shared pause, a breath held across generations and through winters, a moment just before action when the world is felt, not seen. And in this breath, the family lies together, not quite ready to move, but no longer dreaming, no longer lost to the night. Morning has begun, gently and without urgency, and the day that lies ahead will arrive one heartbeat, one breath, one stretch at a time. Now, at last, the long silence that has cloaked the shelter like a second skin begins to yield, not in haste, not with clamor, but with the first true, deliberate movements of the day, so small they might go unnoticed by anyone not fully attuned to the pace of this life. The father, who has for some minutes now been hovering in the space between sleep and wakefulness, finally opens his eyes, not wide, not quickly, but in a slow blink that accepts the new light without resistance. It is dim still, gray and diffuse, leaking through seams in the roof and walls where the snow thinned during the night. But even that pale illumination is enough to define the edges of the space again, the curve of the bone-framed roof, the lump of bundled furs where each family member sleeps, the soft halo of breath hovering above warm bodies in the cold morning air. He does not rise right away. Instead, he lies still, listening to the quiet rustling of the dogs outside as they shake off sleep, to the sound of snow settling along the edges of the shelter, to the slow, deep breathing of his wife and sons beside him. and the even deeper silence where his mother rests. It is a ritual, this still moment after waking, as essential as any task that will follow, allowing the body to remember where it is and why, and how the cold must be met with calm and not resistance. Beside him, the mother stirs too, her eyes opening only halfway, lips slightly parted as she inhales the cool morning air through her nose and lets it out in a slow stream that fogs for a moment and vanishes. Her hand moves first, just her fingers at first, brushing across the fur to touch the edge of her son's foot, confirming what she already knows, that he is there, that he is warm, that the night has passed gently. The boys do not yet open their eyes, but they have shifted, one now tucked more deeply under the shared bedding, the other stretching an arm across his brother's back in a silent gesture of connection more than comfort. There are no words yet. None are needed. Words will come later, when snow is scraped from the entrance, when water is boiled, when dogs are fed. For now, only the gentle rustling of furs, the sound of limbs loosening from hours of stillness, the subtle creaking of the shelter's framework, adjusting to the renewed presence of motion. The grandmother, though still, has opened her eyes too, dark and alert in the low light, her body unmoving, but her presence unmistakable, as if she has been awake longer than any of them, simply waiting for them to join her. Her breathing remains slow, but her gaze flicks toward the roof, where light filters in, then toward the sleds she knows lie buried just outside. Still, she does not speak. This time of day belongs to motion first, and to thought. Speech will come later, when the world feels ready to be heard. The air inside the shelter is cooler now, noticeable, against exposed cheeks and noses, but not unpleasant. It is the kind of cold that sharpens the senses, reminds the mind that the world beyond the furs is wide, and that life, to be lived here, must begin with reverence and care. From outside comes the muffled sound of one of the dogs, letting out a low whine, not from distress, but from anticipation. Soon, the father will rise. Soon, boots will be slipped onto stiff feet. Hands will pull back the covering at the door, and light, real light, will enter the shelter for the first time today. But not yet. For now, this sacred in-between space remains. This pause between night and work, between silence and sound, between stillness and the daily tasks that lie in waiting. It is not laziness, this lingering. It is preservation. It is respect for the balance that life in this land requires. It is the body's way of honoring its place in the pattern. The understanding that to wake too fast is to miss something precious. And so, for a few more minutes, the family breathes, listens, shifts gently under their blankets of fur, and lets the day arrive not all at once, but in quiet, deliberate fragments, as the sky outside softens and the world, still wrapped in snow and silence, prepares itself to be lived in once again. The moment comes not with a word or a command, but with the sound of movement so soft it barely registers. The father pulling back the top layer of fur that covers his chest and shoulders, the subtle sound of hide brushing against hide, of warmth parting from warmth. He sits up slowly, careful not to disturb the resting figures, still curled beside him, his breath hanging in a faint cloud before his face, the cold air licking at the sweat that dried during sleep, and reminding his skin that the stillness of the night has passed. He does not speak. There is no need to. His body has learned to speak without sound, to communicate readiness through motion, through posture, through the careful way he reaches for his boots. The others do not rise yet. The mother watches him with half-lidded eyes, her breathing unchanged, her hands remaining under the furs. She is awake, but her time has not yet come. She preserves her warmth for the children who lie nestled close, their bodies still clinging to the final threads of sleep, drawn inwards by comfort and by the invisible walls of the shelter that still cradle them like the womb of the earth. The grandmother's eyes follow the father, but she too remains still, wrapped not just in blankets, but in experience, knowing that the pace of a day begins not with sudden motion, but with acceptance. Acceptance of cold, of silence, of the body's gradual unfolding from sleep into purpose. Outside, a faint golden hue is beginning to settle along the horizon, visible only as a reflection on the inner wall of the shelter. A slight warming of color that tells of sun not yet seen, but already present somewhere beyond the snowbanks. The father crouches beside the entry flap, which is laced shut with sinew that stiffened during the night. With steady fingers, he begins to loosen it, working each knot with the quiet competence of someone who has done this for decades. No rush, no fumbling, only the practiced dance between fingertips and frozen cord. As he works, the air begins to shift again, the shelter sensing what is about to come. The introduction of morning air, sharp and raw, slicing into the carefully preserved warmth of the night. With one final tug, the flap loosens, and the light enters, not blinding or fierce, but clean and clear, carrying the pale shimmer of the early Arctic dawn, a kind of silvered gold that makes the snow sparkle in a way that is almost soundless, almost sacred. The cold rushes in too, wrapping around the father's face and into the shelter's center, like a breath drawn by the land itself. The mother, now fully awake, shifts gently, drawing the furs more tightly around the boys. One of them groans softly in protest at the invading chill, but does not wake, burying his face against the warmth of her side. The grandmother begins to move now, not quickly, but with dignity, sitting up in a slow, single motion and resting her hands upon her knees as she breathes in the new day, her face expressionless, but her eyes alive with presence. The father steps outside into the snow, his boots crunching softly against the frozen surface, and though his figure is quickly swallowed by the brightness of the reflecting drifts, the warmth he leaves behind lingers in the shelter for a moment longer, like the scent of smoke after a fire has gone out. Inside, the mother begins her work silently, folding back a corner of the bedding, checking on the boys without waking them, touching the grandmother's arm in a gesture that says, "I'm here," without needing to say anything at all. The dogs greet the father with restrained excitement, low whines, gentle tail wags, a stretching of limbs. But even they seem to understand the rhythm of this hour, offering presence instead of demand. The sky above the camp now glows with a full, gentle light, pale but steady, casting long shadows and bringing definition to every curve of the snowdrifts. The day has arrived, not all at once, but in layers, unfolding gently like a blanket pulled back by practiced hands. And within the shelter, the warmth of sleep has not yet fully left, nor has the silence, but both are now visitors rather than owners of the space, preparing to step aside as waking life, steady and slow, takes their place. Now that light has entered and the shelter has breathed in the cold breath of morning, the day begins to take shape, not with noise or rush, but with the slow unraveling of familiar actions performed in near silence. Inside, the mother begins to rise, her movements slow, deliberate, shaped by both the weight of the cold and the careful protection of the warmth still lingering over the sleeping boys. She slides her legs out from beneath the furs and presses her feet to the woven mats on the floor, which are cool but not biting, softened by layers of use and softened further by the body heat that has radiated through the shelter overnight. Her back is straight as she stretches, first her arms overhead in a long, slow arc, then her fingers outward until they tingle slightly from the reintroduction of circulation, and then she lowers them again, eyes half-lidded, observing the boys as they remain bundled, undisturbed. She does not wake them yet. There is time. Outside, the father has begun his work, his figure crouched near the sleds, brushing snow from their frames, inspecting each runner with care, his breath rising in slow, steady clouds as the cold air clings to his eyelashes and the tip of his nose reddens in response. He works without speaking, his hands calloused and sure as they test the leather straps and gently knock away the ice crusted near the bindings. The dogs watch him attentively, but they do not bark or pace. They remain still, quiet, watching him with patient eyes as they lie nestled in their dugout snowbeds, aware that food and movement are coming soon, but trusting the sequence of the day. Back inside, the grandmother has begun her own morning movements, sitting beside the seal oil lamp, which now needs to be rekindled. With practiced hands, she gathers a small portion of dried moss and curls it in a shallow stone dish, placing it close to the lamp's wick before striking stone to steel. Sparks fly, a few fizzle out in the air, and then one catches, a brief glow that she nurtures with a steady breath until it becomes a flickering, steady flame. The lamp, once lit, gives not just light, but a specific kind of heat, dense, oily, faintly scented with the memory of fish and flame, a smell that belongs to every morning the family has ever known. Its warmth reaches outward slowly, curling toward the center of the shelter, and the boys begin to stir in response, not from the change in temperature, but from the shift in atmosphere, the low hiss of the flame, the scent in the air, the barely audible footsteps of their mother moving about with a purpose that signals the end of rest. The younger boy opens his eyes first, blinking into the filtered light that now softens the inside of the shelter, his face blank with the heaviness of waking, lips dry from sleep. His brother follows a moment later, stretching beneath the furs, before pushing them down slowly, the top of his head emerging like a pup from a den. Neither boy speaks. They only look around, taking in the scene they've known every morning of their lives. The soft, yellow light of the lamp, the profile of their grandmother near the fire, the familiar weight of fur blankets, the sound of snow crunching faintly outside. The mother offers each of them a warm smile, not bright or dramatic, but slow and rooted. The kind of smile that says, everything is as it should be. She begins preparing a simple breakfast, pulling small, cold parcels from a leather pouch and placing them near the flame. Strips of dried fish, pieces of fat, morsels that will soften with time and heat. The boys sit up slowly now, rubbing their arms, adjusting their furs, still not fully transitioned from sleep, but willing to accept the invitation of day. The grandmother murmurs something low and warm, a greeting not so much for ears but for hearts, and they nod in response, their bodies already leaning toward the warmth of the lamp. Outside, the sky has become pale and wide. The clouds stretched thin across a horizon, brushed with the faintest pink. The father stands, brushes snow from his knees, and looks toward the shelter with eyes narrowed, not in strain, but in thought, measuring the day ahead, the distance to the ice holes, the readiness of the sled, the strength of the wind. He will come in soon. For now, inside the shelter, the day has begun, not with urgency, but with layers of warmth, of food, of light, of presence, and the knowledge that every part of the routine has its place, its rhythm, and its quiet, essential peace, as warmth from the oil lamp begins to wrap the shelter in soft golden light, and the scent of gently heated, dried fish rises into the air. The quiet morning continues to unfold with the same deliberate grace that has defined every part of life in the camp. The boys now sit upright beneath their furs, eyes still heavy but alert, their bodies leaning toward the shallow stone dish where heat dances over food and fingers begin to thaw. The mother places small pieces of softened fish into each of their hands. No plates, no ceremony, just a gentle offering from hand to hand, and the boys eat slowly, chewing with quiet mouths, their jaws moving steadily in rhythm, the taste of the sea and salt reminding them of the cycle they are part of, the catch, the drying, the storage, the sharing. Their eyes remain low, fixed on the fire or the food, or the slow drift of their own breath in the cold air. Nearby, the grandmother holds her own meal in one hand while tending to the lamp with the other, adjusting the wick with the same care one might give a child's collar or a sled's runner, making sure the flame remains strong but not wasteful. The mother eats last, crouching beside the flame and wrapping her shawl around her shoulders again as she watches the boys carefully, not out of worry, but with the quiet satisfaction of seeing that all is well, that nothing was forgotten, that morning has brought what it always does: food, warmth, and the slow reawakening of the body. Outside the shelter, the father continues his preparations. He moves from sled to harness, inspecting each length of leather for stiffness or cracks, brushing away frost from the carved bone loops where ropes will soon be tied. The dogs now stand, stretching in slow arcs, their tails unfurling, their eyes bright with readiness. One or two bark, short, sharp sounds that are more breath than voice, signs not of impatience, but of recognition. The day is beginning, and they have a place in it. The snow has hardened in the early light, its crust bearing the morning cold like a glass skin, crunching underfoot in a way that signals good conditions for travel. The father nods slightly to himself as he straightens from the sled and turns back toward the shelter, his footsteps slow but sure as he makes his way across the snow-packed path. Inside, the boys have finished their food and now begin pulling on the outer layers of their clothing. Fur-lined mittens, thick hoods, soft leather boots that were warmed near the fire. Their movements are still a little sluggish, their muscles still remembering sleep, but their hands are skilled, tying knots, looping straps, layering warmth. The mother helps the younger boy adjust the strap across his shoulder, patting it flat with practiced ease. She does not speak, but her presence alone guides him through the rest of the process. The grandmother finishes her small meal and wipes her hands on a square of softened hide before folding it neatly and setting it aside, her gaze shifting toward the open flap of the shelter where light now enters freely, washing the walls with a gentle brightness that is neither harsh nor cold. It is the kind of light that changes nothing immediately, but promises that change is near. When the father re-enters, brushing snow from his sleeves and pulling back his hood, the room shifts again, no longer just a space for waking and warming. It is now a place of coordination, of intention. He speaks at last, his voice low and unhurried, offering a brief summary of the snow's condition, the readiness of the sled, the behavior of the dogs. The mother listens with a slight nod, already reaching for the small pouch that contains a few final items: sinew cord, bone, hooks, extra mitts, all things that might be needed on the trail. The grandmother begins collecting the bedding, folding it in careful layers and stacking it along the far wall, her hands working steadily, even as the others move around her. The boys, now dressed and ready, kneel near the entrance, waiting, not eager in the loud way of the very young, but steady, still learning that even departure has its timing. As the final preparations take shape, no one rushes. Time here is not something to race against, but something to move with. The morning has come and is being met with calm, with warmth, with ritual. Outside, the snow gleams beneath a pale sun, and the wide sky opens slowly above them, ready to receive the quiet tracks of sled runners and padded paws. And inside the shelter, the family stands poised, fed, clothed, warmed, held in the soft rhythm of a life that honors not the speed of the day, but the grace of its beginning. With the shelter now warm, but no longer filled with the quiet weight of sleep, and the light outside continuing to strengthen in slow, pale waves, the family prepares to step out into the snow-covered world that waits with open silence beyond their rounded walls. The father is first to move, crouching to tie the final loop on the sled, tightening the leather strap that secures the fur-lined bundle of tools wrapped in sealskin, a packet that holds the things he knows he will need, but hopes not to use: extra lashings, a second hook, spare runners for emergency repairs. His breath moves steadily through the cold air, each exhale curling away in thin, persistent ribbons as he finishes his task and places one gloved hand gently on the lead dog's back, not as a command, but as a shared acknowledgement that the waiting is nearly over. The dogs, now fully awake and alert, stand in position, their paws stamping the snow lightly, breath rising like steam from hot springs in the Arctic air. They do not bark or pull yet. They know the pace of this life. Inside, the mother finishes packing a smaller pouch, closing it tightly with a twist of sinew and tucking it into the folds of her clothing, close to her chest where it will stay, warm, food for the journey, enough to quiet hunger, but light enough to carry without strain. The boys are bundled now, heads wrapped, cheeks tucked behind soft fur, their hands stiff in their mitts, but warmed by the movement of anticipation. They stand side by side near the entrance, the younger boy shifting from foot to foot, while the older remains still, eyes focused on his father through the opening flap, his small frame squared in imitation of the man he watches. The grandmother remains seated near the back of the shelter, her hands busy folding and refolding the corners of the bedding she has already arranged, not out of necessity, but from habit, from the quiet sense that every fabric should rest in its proper place before the shelter is empty again. Her face holds no urgency, only the firm patience of someone who has seen thousands of mornings pass, each one different in the details, but identical in its deep, repeating rhythm. She nods once as the mother catches her eye. No words, only the briefest smile, exchanged between women who have lived this life side by side for many seasons. The mother moves toward the entrance then, placing a hand on each of the boys' shoulders as she guides them out into the cold, her grip firm but tender, the way one leads not just children, but companions. The cold greets them not with a slap, but with a quiet taking in, wrapping around them like another layer of clothing. Not cruel, but absolute. Their boots sink into the snow with soft crunches, and the boys squint briefly as their eyes adjust to the glare of light bouncing off, endless, white. The sky above is pale and cloud-streaked, the sun no more than a distant disk behind a veil of frozen air, but still it brings color back to the world, softening the blues and grays of the landscape with touches of gold along the horizon. The father gestures for the boys to climb aboard the sled, and they do so wordlessly, settling into the furs and bracing themselves against the small rise and dip of the wooden frame. The mother checks each edge of the sled's load, securing the pouch beneath one side, her breath quickening from movement, but not from exertion. When all is ready, the father clicks softly, a signal to the dogs who, at last, begin to lean forward, their muscles tightening into the familiar pattern of motion, pulling the sled with slow, deliberate strength across the crusted snow. The sound of sled runners gliding over ice is quiet but constant, a low shushing that seems to echo across the otherwise silent plain. The grandmother stands at the shelter's entrance now, her figure framed by the curved arch of snow and hide, her arms folded beneath her shawl. She watches as they depart, not with a wave, but with steady eyes, sending them off with the strength of her presence. Behind her, the shelter remains, empty, silent, warm from the recent life it held, its interior breathing out faint wisps of heat that mix with the colder air drifting back in. The sled glides forward, The dogs trot in formation. The father walks beside them. The mother trails slightly behind, her steps compacting the snow with even pressure, and the boys sit quietly on the sled, their eyes wide and blinking as the world opens up before them, white, vast, and still, ready to receive them once again into its boundless quiet. The sled glides forward over the packed surface of snow with the steady rhythm of familiarity, its runners singing a soft, even note against the ice that only those attuned to the land would ever notice, and the dogs pull in unison, their bodies low and strong, moving as one creature with many legs, each paw pressing into the white crust and pushing back with the power of memory rather than command. The morning air is crisp, dry, and faintly biting at exposed skin, though none of it is cruel or unexpected. This is the kind of cold that simply is, the ever-present skin of the land itself, brushing against eyelashes and freezing the smallest beads of breath into tiny stars that drift behind them. The father walks alongside the sled, his boots breaking through the top layer of snow in firm, even steps, his gloved hands resting near his sides, but ready, always, to adjust a harness, calm a restless dog, or point to a shift in the snow that the boys, still learning, might overlook. His eyes scan the distance regularly, not nervously, but with the attentiveness of someone who knows that the land, though often still, is never empty. Beside him, the sled creaks lightly as it slides. The boys nestled beneath layers of fur, watching the world pass in quiet wonder, their cheeks red from the cold, their noses peeking just above their scarves, eyes wide and blinking from the brightness reflected off the endless snow. They say little, if anything, their voices tucked down inside the hush of morning, their bodies rocked gently by the uneven surface beneath the sled, their attention divided between the dogs ahead, the movement of their father, and the wide, flat world stretching out in every direction like an unbroken page of white. Behind them, the mother walks with slow, measured steps, her breath steady, her shoulders squared against the breeze, her mind turning not with worry, but with quiet calculation, thinking of the bait, of the holes in the ice they'd checked 2 days earlier, of how thick the wind crust might have grown overnight, and whether the fish beneath would stir early or wait for the sun to rise higher. Her eyes trace the sled's track behind her, noting the depth and firmness of the runner's trail, ensuring that nothing is shifting too fast or sinking too low, her steps falling perfectly within the frame of that trail, a habit formed long ago. The land around them remains still, but not empty. It breathes with quiet power, the hills low and round like sleeping backs under snow, the occasional flicker of wind carving ghost trails in the loose powder, the sky vast and veiled in pale light, like thin ice above a deep sea. Somewhere in the distance, the faint glint of the ice holes begins to appear, a darker texture amid the white, signaling their destination, where the surface gives way to the cold water below, and the work of the day will unfold in calm persistence. The dogs increase their pace just slightly, sensing the nearing of something familiar, their ears flicking back to catch the subtle cues of voice and motion, their breaths now heavier, each exhale a puff of urgency. The father slows them gently with a small sound, a low command that needs no force, only tone, and the sled slows its glide. The boys shift beneath their furs, sitting a bit more upright, recognizing the signs of arrival. Not dramatic, not marked with fanfare, but clear. The land is changing beneath them, subtly, and their part in the day is about to begin. The mother stops a few paces back, watching the boys closely as they prepare to step down, her face calm but watchful. The wind picks up ever so slightly, brushing the edge of her hood, carrying the scent of snow and cold water, and something else, something that only comes near the fishing places, a faint mineral bite to the air, a signal that the surface is thin and alive below. The sled settles into a stop. The dogs lower their heads, standing still but eager. The father walks ahead to check the spot where the hole was last marked, brushing snow aside with a carved bone scoop, revealing the slight depression where the ice has been cut many times before. The sound of snow being pushed aside, of breathing in the cold, of cloth shifting over cloth. These are the sounds of morning work beginning, not rushed, not shouted, but lived through motion and breath and quiet knowing. The land does not speak, but it accepts them again, as it has every day, with the silence of ancient patience. They have arrived, and the stillness is now theirs to share. With the sled now at rest, and the dogs settling into the stillness like sentinels waiting for the next command. The father kneels beside the old ice hole, his knees pressing into the packed snow as he brushes away the thin crust that has formed since their last visit, each stroke of his gloved hand sending small flurries into the air that catch the morning light like drifting ash. The surface has sealed overnight, not thick, just enough to require patience, a skin of ice rather than armor. So he reaches into the sled and retrieves the long, bone-handled pick that rests bundled in sealskin near the base of their toolkit, its surface worn smooth by countless mornings, just like this one. The boys sit quietly on the sled, leaning forward slightly beneath the thick furs as they watch, not with excitement, but with a focused kind of calm, the kind that comes from knowing that what they're seeing is important, even if it unfolds slowly. The pick meets the ice with a soft cracking sound, subtle, not sharp, and the father works methodically, tapping around the circle, rather than through it, widening the cracks gently before placing the point at the center and delivering a series of light, precise strikes that send ripples outward across the surface before the frozen seal gives way with a dull, satisfying pop. A small column of mist rises as the cold air meets the black stillness of the water below, a brief, breath-like exhale from the underworld that has been sealed off all night, and the father lowers the pick carefully, scraping out the edges of the hole to clean its rim. The mother approaches now, stepping softly across the snow, carrying the fishing line wrapped around a curved bone reel. And when she reaches the opening, she kneels opposite her husband, their movements coordinated without discussion, shaped by years of repetition. She unwinds the line slowly, checking the hook and the weight, running her fingers along the cord to ensure nothing is frayed or tangled, then lowers the line into the water with a steady motion, letting it sink until it reaches the depth where the fish are known to drift, not far in this part of the ice field, but deep enough that the weight must pull slowly. The line disappears into the blackness without a ripple. She holds it lightly between her fingers, not gripping, but resting her hand against the edge of the hole, eyes half closed, not from tiredness, but from the stillness required to feel the faintest tug. The boys slide down from the sled now, approaching on careful feet, their eyes locked on the line, on their mother's hands, on the rhythm of the breath between all things. The father leans back slightly, letting her listen to the water through the line, and reaches for the second set of tools. Another pick, another line, another bundle of bait wrapped in softened hide. He begins work on a second hole, a few feet from the first, and the sound of the pick striking ice resumes, quiet but steady. Around them, the land is utterly still, the only movement that of their breath rising and the subtle dance of small snowflakes that lift and fall in windless spirals, stirred by no more than their presence. The dogs lie down now, heads resting on their paws, their eyes half shut but ears alert, their bodies at rest but not asleep. The mother's line twitches faintly, and she tightens her fingers around it, not jerking, not pulling, just steadying it, feeling the motion that might mean nothing or everything. The younger boy leans in instinctively, his mouth slightly open, but says nothing. The moment stretches, then another twitch. The mother lifts the line slowly, gently, her elbow rising with care, her other hand guiding the cord in small circles until the shimmer of movement reveals itself beneath the surface. A flicker of silver, a small fish caught by the lip, rising through the ice like a sliver of light itself. She pulls it free with a calm efficiency, cupping it in her hand and removing the hook in a single fluid motion before lowering it into a leather pouch nearby. There are no cheers, no smiles, no clapping hands, just the quiet acknowledgement of success, of food brought from the depths, of life continuing as it should. The boys look on with deep focus, committing every motion to memory. The father begins to bait the second line. The mother lowers her hook again, and in this slow, practiced, unbroken motion, the family continues their work, not against the land, but with it, participating in the long, circular rhythm of survival. One quiet catch at a time, time stretches in slow, unhurried arcs around the small fishing site, the white landscape, remaining unchanged in every direction, still and silent, save for the occasional soft scrape of a boot against snow, or the brief murmur of leather cords shifting in gloved fingers as the family remains in place beside the holes, participating in that timeless, quiet task that makes up the essence of their life on this land. The fishing continues without rush, without ambition even, just with presence, with repetition, with the deep understanding that nature gives when it chooses, and that waiting is not passive but full of purpose. The mother remains kneeling by her first hole, her fingers relaxed, but aware as they hold the line steady, her breath now deeper and slower, matching the rhythms of the cold beneath her feet. Every now and then, the line will flick just slightly, and her arm responds, not by pulling, but by flexing, an invitation more than a command, until, once again, the glint of silver breaks the black surface of the water, and she reels in another fish, small and shimmering, its body curved in the air like a piece of bent moonlight. Before it's carefully tucked into the pouch, she does not count the catch, nor does she pause to admire it. Her attention remains attuned to the line, to the movement, to the sensation of continuation. Nearby, the father finishes opening his second hole, and after cleaning the edge and preparing the hook with care, he lowers his own line into the depths. His hands are larger, thicker, shaped by years of working in cold, but they move with the same gentleness, an ease that only comes from endless practice. The boys sit close to the mother, one on each side, their knees tucked to their chests, beneath layers of fur, their eyes fixed on the water, as if trying to see beyond the reflection and into the world below. The younger boy mimics his mother's posture, cradling an empty spool between his palms, as if already imagining the day he'll hold a line of his own. The older boy, more still, leans slightly forward, absorbing every detail, every pause between motion, every careful lift of the hand when a tug is felt. The dogs remain in the background, resting now, but lifting their heads from time to time, sniffing the air for any change in wind or presence. The sun remains hidden behind a thick veil of high cloud, casting no shadow, but its light lingers, enough to illuminate every surface with a kind of pearled glow, soft whiteness that feels both far away and close, pressing against the eyes and blurring the horizon into a seamless wash of sky and land. As time moves on, the number of fish in the pouch slowly grows, not a bounty, not a feast, but enough to know that the day is being answered, that the work of patience is being met with reward. No one speaks much. Words are sparse, offered only in brief murmurs, when necessary. A question about a line's tension, a suggestion to switch holes, a short confirmation about the dogs. These are not conversations in the usual sense, but more like brushstrokes in the larger painting of the day, applied gently, not to disrupt the stillness, but to add to it. Every so often, the wind stirs, lifting a fine layer of powdery snow and drifting it across the surface like smoke, brushing against the fur-lined hoods and tugging at the corners of clothing. But no one shivers. No one moves to leave. They remain where they are, warmed by motion, by proximity, by the faint glow of heat rising from inside themselves. The grandmother is not with them here by the ice, but her presence is still felt. The folds she made in the blankets back at the shelter, the way the pouches were packed, the rhythm of the tasks that guide their every move. The sky begins to change, just subtly, the light softening again, the gray turning deeper at the edges, reminding them without urgency that the hours are passing and that soon they'll begin the slow return to camp. But not yet. For now, the water still offers itself one fish at a time. The lines still dance with quiet promise, and the silence, far from empty, continues to carry the weight of generations, of days just like this one, lived not for speed or spectacle, but for the steady act of being present in the cold, in the quiet, in the work of life itself. As the long hours beside the ice holes pass without urgency, The light around them shifts in soft gradients, not with sudden sunset or dramatic color, but with a deepening of tone, a quiet dimming that is more felt than seen, like a blanket being drawn up over the landscape, one thread at a time, and it signals gently that the time to begin returning is drawing near. The wind remains light, but steadier now, curling around the family in longer strokes, brushing snow across their boots and shoulders, as if to remind them that their stillness has been long enough. The mother reels in her line with slow care, not because of a tug, but because she senses the moment has arrived, the unseen boundary between enough and too much, and with practiced motion, she clears the hook of ice, tucks the cord around the reel, and folds the line into its pouch. She glances at the boys, both of whom have remained quiet and steady, their expressions unreadable, but calm, and with the same wordless ease that has defined the entire day. She nods toward the sled. They understand, standing and brushing the snow from their knees, their feet moving stiffly at first, from long sitting, but soon falling back into rhythm. The father, crouched over his own line, senses the movement behind him and looks up only briefly before turning back to his task. Just one more moment, one last pull of the line, one final chance to listen to the ice before he, too, begins to reel in. The dogs, sensing the change, rise from their resting positions and stretch, their muscles rippling under thick fur as they shake snow from their sides and begin to reposition themselves in front of the sled, tails low but alert, breaths puffing visibly in the cool air. The pouch of fish is modest but sufficient, its weight a quiet reassurance that this day was not wasted, that effort and patience were met by the sea with gifts enough for the evening meal, and perhaps a bit more to dry for later. The mother places the pouch among the carefully packed supplies on the sled, securing it beneath a layer of hide to protect it from the wind. The father completes his packing next, bundling the tools, checking the dog's harnesses, adjusting a loose strap with quiet concentration. No one rushes. Every action is performed with the same deliberation as in the morning, but now with a subtle inward focus that comes when work is done, when the energy begins to shift toward warmth, toward shelter, toward the quiet restoration of rest. The boys climb back into their place on the sled, this time moving more slowly, more carefully, tired not in a burdensome way, but in the way that comes from being outdoors all day, surrounded by stillness, breathing deeply of cold air, learning without speaking. The mother adjusts their hoods and pulls the fur over their laps before taking her place behind the sled again. The father, now standing at the front, gives a single word, soft, short, and the dogs begin to move. The sled glides forward once more, its wooden runners humming low against the crusted snow, retracing its path back toward the curved form of the shelter that now sits low on the horizon, half blended into the drifts, waiting like a memory that has never left. The trail they carved this morning is still visible, shallow and softened, and it receives them easily, as though welcoming their return. The wind picks up slightly behind them, as if to help push them along. The sky continues its dimming, now brushing blue into the gray, painting the land in the subtle palette of evening. The sled moves steadily, the dogs in rhythm, the family in silence, and the camp drawing closer with each breath. In this return, there is no ceremony, no celebration, just a continuation of the rhythm, a folding in of motion, of work completed and day nearing its close. The boys rest against one another, heads low. The mother walks behind them, her eyes occasionally drifting upward to the sky. The father leads with quiet certainty, and the dogs, ever loyal, carry them all back, their paws pressing into the same snow they've known every season, every year, over and over. As they draw nearer to the shelter, its curved shadow rises into clearer focus, and smoke begins to trail from its vent, thin, pale, and promising warmth. Someone, perhaps the grandmother, has already lit the lamp again. As the sled glides the final stretch toward the rounded shelter, the world around them begins to fold itself inward, drawing the light more closely into the snowbanks, deepening every shadow into softness, and wrapping the vast landscape in the early quiet of night, not yet fully fallen, but already whispering at the edges of the air. The dogs slow of their own accord, their pace shifting from stride to step as they near the familiar curves of home, where the snow is packed and shaped by many departures and returns, where paw prints and boot prints mingle in a gentle confusion that speaks of routine and rootedness. The father raises one hand, not as a signal, but as acknowledgement, and the sled comes to a gradual stop, its wooden frame settling into place with the same creaking grace it carried when it departed. The boys stir gently beneath the furs, blinking slowly as the movement ceases, their eyes turning toward the curved doorway of the shelter, now glowing faintly from within. It seems lit from the soft golden flicker of the oil lamp, whose warmth pushes gently through the skin of hide and snow to touch the oncoming dark with the promise of fire. The mother walks past the sled now, reaching for the bundled pouch that holds the fish, lifting it in both arms with the same steady reverence she gave it earlier, as though nothing has changed except the direction of her motion. She opens the flap of the shelter with one fluid movement, and the warmth inside breathes out against the cold like a sigh, fragrant with smoke and lamp oil and the faint, ever-present scent of hide and home. The grandmother sits near the center, already tending the lamp, its flame low and sure, her profile illuminated by firelight as she glances up at the return, offering no exclamation, only the soft shift of her shoulders that shows she knew, as always, they would come back whole and quiet. And as they were, the father begins to unhitch the dogs, whispering their names as he moves from one to the next, running his hand along their backs, checking the straps, guiding them toward the side of the shelter where they curl down in the snow once more, not with the restless energy of morning, but with the slow satisfaction of a job well done. The boys climb from the sled and enter the shelter, their bodies brushing snow from the doorway, their cheeks red, their limbs stiff, their voices still unused. Inside, the heat is soft and low, not hot, but enough to take the edge from the air and to soften the joints. The grandmother hands each boy a piece of dried meat, not as a reward, but as a continuation, something to chew slowly while their hands thaw, while their legs remember stillness again. The mother stores the fish in a side pouch near the wall, beneath a strip of fur and removes the outermost layer of her clothing, shaking snow from the edges before folding it neatly beside the boy's boots. The father enters last, brushing snow from his shoulders, ducking beneath the curve of the doorway, and sitting slowly on the mat near the lamp, exhaling in one long breath that seems to pull the cold from his bones. No one speaks, but the silence is not empty. It is full, layered with meaning, with routine, with the unspoken agreement of a life lived closely, deliberately, and well. The lamp flickers, the fish rest, the tools lie stacked in a corner, drying quietly in the low heat. Outside, the wind begins to rise just slightly, brushing against the shelter, rattling the edge of the flap. But inside, everything remains still. The grandmother places another piece of moss into the lamp, coaxing the flame just slightly higher, and the light dances along the inside walls, revealing again the gentle arc of the structure, the stitching along the seams, the impressions left by bodies on the mats. The boys lie back now, their full bellies quiet, their limbs loose, their breathing evening out into long, steady lines. The mother leans back against the fur wall, her hands resting on her knees, eyes half closed. The father stretches out on his side, one hand behind his head, watching the flame as though it were speaking softly to him, in a language only the tired truly understand. The night settles in around them. The wind remains gentle. The shelter holds firm. The silence is complete now, not because nothing remains to be said, but because everything that needed saying was lived. And so the day ends, not with a closing, but with a folding of bodies into blankets, of stories into memory, of life into night. And the snow continues to fall outside, slowly, endlessly, wrapping the world once more in the long, unbroken dream of the Arctic.